and welcome. We've now finished with the process of the oath and the notices, and we should now be able to get those things done and start serving notices on our local alleged authorities and anyone from that sphere who attempts to make unlawful demands on us. So what sort of demands we might encounter are in fact unlawful? Any type of demand for money or compliance and loss of property or employment, which is not being caused by an action of ours from which no victim emerged, could qualify. For example, parking, speeding, or fines for minor traffic offences where no one was harmed and no property damaged come into this category. So does anything which we are obliged to pay for whether we make use of the service or not. Some examples are licences or taxes levied on all people for something which many of them do not use, for instance, public broadcasting networks, or which apply to some people but not others, e.g. forced contributions to charities, even though some of those thus levied have already contributed voluntarily. We should also be prepared to challenge utility bills, because utilities are a public asset. Clean running water, heating and cooling are necessities for subsistence, and therefore a service which has already been paid for from each person's trust created simultaneously with the birth certificate and taxes already paid. Selling public assets into private hands for private profit is a criminal act. These need to be pushed back against. We don't refuse to pay outright, but we send a notice of conditional acceptance, wherein we state that we are willing to comply with the demands, provided the issuer of them can prove that they have the authority to demand payment under the law as it now stands. These things are merely rules which the corporate legalese system uses to milk funds from law-abiding citizens. They will tell us they are laws, but laws, as we have seen, are things which bind everyone and to which all people consent. Everyone agrees that the four tenets of common law, do no harm, cause no loss, commit no fraud, and keep the peace, are essential for a harmonious, peaceful society to exist. Any legislation which emanates from Parliament, bureaucracy, police acting beyond their role of keeping the peace, etc., which do breach any of those tenets, is therefore not a law. It's merely a rule made up to benefit some people at the expense of others. As the former John Locke said, a bad law is no law at all. We hardly need a list to be able to see who benefits from these instruments and who loses. We could spend hours listing all kinds of demands made upon us, which when examined fail the lawful test. Being confined to home or forbidden to go to work because someone has decreed, without substantive evidence, that there is a threat to the health of the public, are blatant examples of unlawfulness. They are even illegal according to Australian legislation drafted by the very people attempting to enforce them. We'll return to this issue later. Several videos ago, I mentioned a demand placed upon me by the Therapeutic Goods Administration, who had seized some property I had imported. Let's look at how this has developed. We see here the document I was sent. It lists the relevant goods, and in the green section deigns to inform me of the conditions under which I may be permitted to acquire them. In the red section are listed threats relating to the destruction of my goods and possible penalties that they could attempt to apply to me, such as heavy fines or jail time. The address is a PO box. On the reverse of this document, we see references to various Acts of Parliament regarding this issue, and at the bottom an electronic signature containing only the first name of the officer making these demands. When this arrived, I notified Officer No Name in a cover letter that making demands with threats as a public servant, without either identifying oneself fully or providing a physical address, or a written wet ink signature, or stating that the statements were made with full commercial liability and on penalty of perjury, constitutes misconduct in public office and disqualifies the entire document as a lawful instrument. This covering letter accompanied the notice of conditional acceptance. There has been no response to either of those letters. Accordingly, having ascertained the physical address of the TGA, I sent the second notice, default and an opportunity to cure. This also received no response, so they have now been sent the third, informing them that they are in dishonour and have given full legal tacit agreement to all the statements in my correspondence. Along with this notice was another covering letter explaining that since the TGA agreed with my position that it was lawful for me to ignore their demands, it must also be unlawful for them to retain possession of my goods, and I demanded that they forward them on to me, lest I choose to initiate an action against them for theft and damages. It was explained that should they persist in their unlawful behaviour, even if I didn't act against them at this time, that they may expect to have to account for themselves in a proper constitutional court later. We await developments. An interesting sidelight is the fact that, having split my order into two halves on reordering, both these second parcels have since been delivered to me, despite the second one having been opened by Australia Post for inspection by the Australian Border Force. We can see the photo. When I send the fourth notice, I will be asking what exactly is their position re this medicine. Is it allegedly against legislation to import it or not? And if it is, why are some amounts apparently ripe for confiscation, but others not so? Of course, the real position is that any acts or legislation which, like those quoted, cause loss or harm to people have been rendered null and void as stipulated in the last sentence of Article 61. I've included this story because it illustrates the point made before, namely that these demands placed upon us can be both unlawful and illegal. Those seeking to enforce their edicts upon us are constantly stressing that they are acting legally, meaning according to acts and statutes passed by the respective legislatures. However, lawful trumps legal, morally and in any court run according to the Constitution. Everyone is aware that taking someone else's property without their consent is stealing. In every case, that is unlawful. What the legalese system is trying to do, and succeeding very well if people are afraid to stand up for their rights, is to get us to believe that it's morally acceptable for Parliament, whose job it is to act as our servants, to pass legislation which gives some people the right to confiscate the goods of others for the benefit of some other unidentified persons, usually referred to as the public, or less hypocritically as the Crown. Thus they contend that if something is legal according to enacted legislation, that it has equal or even superior validity to something which we all know to be unlawful. It's way past time for people to stop kowtowing to this nonsense and stand in their truth. Article 61 gives us the power to do this. It's not only a power, but also a royal command. It has more force and legitimacy than all the unconstitutional legislation sitting on the statute books. And those trying to keep it a secret from the public know it. The illegitimate governments trying to reduce us all to the status of chattels have made their motives plain. They scarcely even pretend anymore to be acting morally. Article 61 is a call to action for every citizen. It's irrelevant whether we feel sufficiently empowered to take up the fight. When the Second World War broke out, there were millions of Commonwealth citizens who would have thought that they were neither as well trained nor as well equipped as their opponents. Some, no doubt, felt like leaving it all to someone else to do the fighting. But that wasn't an option. If there had been too many cowards, the war would never have been fought, let alone won. It was a case of fronting up with whatever you could bring to the fight and doing your best. That was the gig. We are in that same situation today. The enemy is attacking us. We have been called up by royal command to resist treason and tyranny. The battle has been joined. There's no middle ground, no neutrality. We either resist treason or we aid and abet it by doing nothing. The law is crystal clear on that. It's time to get serious. Article 61 isn't an interesting concept, a possible option, something to debate around a cosy fire with a beer or glass of wine or scotch, or something to do when I get around to it. It's a true law, the only law of the land, and an order just like an order in any other war. That is the fact. People need to wake up to it. The bogus authorities seeking to place us under their boot heels are aware of it, and everyone who has heard of it is obliged to act accordingly, or accept the eventual disapproval that attends cowardice in the face of the enemy. It's not as if we're being forced to walk towards machine gun nests under artillery fire. We're being called to stand up and speak peacefully, that we might eventually shame the traitors into suing for clemency when we have woken enough of our brothers and sisters. It would be embarrassing, would it not, to be asked by one of these purveyors of unlawful demands, "Are you standing under Article 61? And to have to answer, "No, not yet," only to be told, "Well, why are you complaining to me about not following the law when you're not even doing so yourself?" We each have the choice to live timidly or by courage and integrity. Our country is being betrayed and attacked by the very people we employ to defend it. Of course, there are naysayers trying to cast doubt on the validity of Article 61 or the Magna Carta itself. To those people, my response is simple. The Queen had access to the best and most highly qualified legal and constitutional advice in the entire Commonwealth. And apart from failing to honour her coronation oath, she acted in accordance with the protocols about which she was no doubt advised. That is why Article 61 is in force, and why we the people must also get into force with it. Thank you for watching.